Hi everyone, let's have a look at a game of chess that I've won about 5 times in exactly the same way. So I'm white and we play the Sicilian defense, play an open version of it. Knight f6 attacks the e4 pawn, so knight c3 defends. And here there are many moves black can play, but the game I want to show you is in the dragon variation, which is the move g6. Point of g6 is to fianchetto this bishop since it was behind this wall of dark squared pawns. So it's logical and it's very popular, especially with amateurs. Now against the dragon, the move that I like to play is pretty infrequently played. It's not a popular move. In fact, if you look at the database on the bottom right here, this is the amateur database on Lichess. The move that I like to play is number 6 on the list, f4, and this is called the Levenfish variation. And the reason I like it is because it's very tactical and complicated, and it's easy for black to go wrong, and I don't have to learn a lot of heavy theory, and the game is usually unexpected. Black doesn't expect this move, and black's usually not prepared. In fact, looking at the database, you can see the most common reply here is bishop to g7, which already is an inaccuracy. Masters don't play bishop to g7 in this position. Instead, they play knight to c6. Why? Well, the purpose of this move f4 is to support the pawn push e5. Knight to c6 would dissuade that pawn push since it controls e5. However, every time I play the Levenfish, or almost every time, my opponent plays bishop to g7. It's a natural reaction. That's what dragon players want to play. Now, if I see that move, I do push the pawn to e5. Okay? And most of the time, my opponents will exchange pawns, and then they have to figure out, what do I do with the knight? Where does it go? Now, again, look at the database here on the right, and you'll see the most common move is knight to g4. That's the move I often face, and it's a mistake. It's more than an inaccuracy, it's a mistake. Let's look at the evaluation here. Right now it's plus 0.4, so black is hanging in there. He's doing okay. But let's see what happens after knight to g4. Now it's up to plus 1.5, so that's definitely a mistake to put the knight there. But it's tempting because black now has 2 attackers on the e5 square. So players reason, I'm just putting it there temporarily, then I'm going to take the e5 pawn next, and I'm doing really well. Well, the reason this is a mistake is because that knight is very vulnerable on that g4 square. It is currently defended by the light squared bishop, but here's how we're going to take advantage of this misplaced knight. We're going to play bishop to b5 check. Now let's look at all the possible responses here. If you look at the database, you'll see 5 different responses. You'll see king to f8 is the first response, bishop to d7 is the second response, knight to c6, third most popular, knight to d7, fourth most popular, and even 2 people played queen to d7 for some reason, dropping the queen. Well, let's play the most frequently played move here in the database, king to f8, and watch that evaluation. Plus 1.5, play king f8, plus 18.7. It's a huge blunder that I almost always see when my opponent reaches this position. In the database, it outnumbers the second most popular move 2 to 1. Well, do you see why it's a blunder? What's white's move here? Okay, well, white wins the queen with knight to e6 check with a discovery on the queen. All right, and there's really no way to hold the game. So that's obviously a blunder. So why do so many people play that move king to f8? Well, they're worried about their knight here on g4, and they realized that it was a mistake to put it there because of bishop to b5 check. For example, the second most popular move, bishop to d7, blocks the check, but it just drops the knight. You just take the knight, the bishop can't take you, it's pinned to the king. So white goes up a piece. Same thing with knight to d7. White just goes up a piece. He just blocked his bishop's protection of that knight. Well, what about the other move? Knight to c6. Well, that looks bad to people and they discard it because of the continuation knight takes c6, b takes c6, bishop takes c6, check, forking the king and the rook. Well, it turns out that's actually the best move in the position, even though white has a substantial advantage of plus 1.6 according to the engine right now. Let's see, how can black hold on here? It looks like he's losing more than 1.6. Well, let's follow it up. Okay, white should take the knight, but black doesn't take back with the b pawn. First, he removes the queens from the board, and white should recapture with the knight. And then maybe he's thinking of playing bishop to d7 here. Okay, and black's currently a piece down. But that doesn't work because white can save both of these pieces by moving the knight to d4 to safety and guarding that bishop. So that doesn't work, but black does have a way to get the piece back. He can play a6. And the idea is this knight has no good square to go to deliver a discovered check. Wherever we move that knight, black will respond with a takes b5 to resolve the check. So white should drop the bishop back to a4 here and continue to pressure that king. Okay, well, what does black do now? Well, now black plays bishop to d7. That does pin the knight. If the knight moves away, black gets that bishop on a4. Well, what does white do about that? Well, white reasons he's going to drop a piece here. He's going to give the piece back, so he might as well get something for it. And he's going to do a little minor tactic called a desperado. A desperado is where you can't save a piece, so you take something down with you. And the move white wants to play here is knight takes e7, and at least get a pawn, and then probably either drop that bishop or drop that knight. But before he takes on e7, he realizes that knight is really well placed here. It's aggressive and it's even attacking e5. So we might as well drive it back first with h3. And there's no square for that knight other than back on the h6 square. Then we can follow through with our desperado. And black would probably take the bishop, and then we can retreat our knight to safety. And then we remain up a crucial pawn in the position. This pawn is under attack, but white is also threatening a fork here on c7. So that's why white is doing better, and the engine gives it plus 1.9. All right, but going all the way back now, that's the best black can do after knight to g4. So what should black have done? Well, the best move is knight f d7. Okay, if you see that move, you still have a good advantage. The engine says plus 0.6. And I recommend playing e6 to attack that knight and to attack the f7 pawn. Okay, taking this pawn doesn't look so great because white can capture back and fork the queen and the bishop. Although it looks like black is losing a piece because when he saves his queen, you can take the bishop with check, but that's not true because the bishop can actually take on c3 with check. And then after recovering the bishop, the queen can get out to safety like on a5. However, white is really dominating in this position, even though the material is equal. That king is very unsafe there and cannot castle at the moment. And the engine does give this a plus 1.9. So you don't have to worry about that pawn being taken. What black should do is move this knight to safety. And the best place to move it to is on e5, which incidentally protects f7. So if we were to take f7 right now, he could recapture with the knight and still castle. Well, we have better than that. We're going to play bishop to b5 check. It's a key move in a lot of variations of the 11 fish. And this disrupts black again. He can't block the check on d7 because our pawn has that covered. So the best he has is knight b to c6. And that's okay because we can't take twice here. He has that covered by that knight on e5. Well, what we're going to do is play e takes f7 check. And remember I said earlier this knight was poised to recapture? Well, now it can't, not in this line. Because if it recaptures, then we are going to take twice on c6. We are going to take that, and if he recaptures, we take with the bishop and fork the rook and king. So this forces the king to take back on f7, and then we can castle with a tempo, with a check. And the material is equal, but again, I prefer white because white's king is safer. Okay, and so the engine agrees. The engine says it's about plus 0.5. It's not crushing. This is a possible way to play. But going back, that's why I think that's the best black can do here after this move, bishop to g7. And that's why I think that's an inaccuracy. Okay, it allows this move e5. And then the best line, we saw knight to g4 was no good. The best line is knight f d7, and that's how we got into that nice position with drawing that king out. Okay, so what should black do if not bishop to g7 against 11 fish? Well, the amateurs who played the second most popular move got it right here. Okay, the best move is knight to c6, according to theory, according to what masters like to play, and it makes logical sense. It does support the e5 square. It dissuades us from pushing our pawn there now. Well, one way to play for white is to capture the knight on c6, and after black recaptures, then you can push the pawn to e5. And I explored these lines for a while. I learned this from a book called Starting Out the Sicilian by John Ems. And this is the way the book recommended white play. But I didn't get very good positions with it. So, and the engine agrees it's not very good for white. It's at negative 0.3. So I went and looked for another possible move here, another plan, and I decided if knight to c6 comes, then I'm going to abandon this idea of pushing this pawn to e5. And I'm just going to make a sensible developing move, bishop to e3. And the engine says the position is about equal. And maybe it's because of stuff like this that you don't see grandmasters playing the 11 fish attack very often, because it's hard to get an advantage as white if black is well prepared. But it's not bad for white. It's not refuted. It's an equal position, and it's a possible way to play. And I do like it. I can even play this position okay. All right, so what about black's response here? Well, let's look at two responses. Maybe knight g4 is a logical move to attack the undefended bishop on e3 that we just placed there, and that knight is guarded by the bishop. And this time it's pretty safe on g4 because this knight is blocking any checks with the bishop. So that seems logical. Well, in that case, we're going to drop the bishop all the way back to g1. And we'll eventually kick the knight out. And if we want to castle queenside, then this bishop won't get in our way. This is okay. For example, black might finally finish the fianchetto here with bishop to g7. And we can play h3 and kick the knight back. Probably it would go to f6. Okay, and then queen to f3 is a logical move just to get ready to castle queenside in a hurry here to support the e4 pawn. I think when you look at the database here, yeah, the amateur database says a lot of people play queen to d2. That's a possible move too, but I don't like putting the queen right where this knight can attack it by taking on e4. You have to keep your eye on possible tactics of releasing this bishop on that knight and attacking the queen. It's safe for now, but I think the queen is safer on f3. And keep in mind that bishop is protecting that knight, and we're about to castle. We'll have a rook protecting that knight as well. And these pawns are still gaining white a lot of space. So I like that position there. Okay, what else could Black do besides knight to g4? Well, he might just finish the fianchetto with bishop to g7. In that case, I'll play bishop to e2 to protect that g4 square. So now that he didn't go to g4, he's now dissuaded from doing so. We'll just take the knight if he does. Okay, Black might castle there. We'll castle kingside. And I wondered if that was safe. There are a lot of times in the Sicilian where I've played my pawn to f4 and I got into trouble along this dark square diagonal. So I wondered what happens if Black plays queen to b6 here. Common move. That pins this knight, sort of pins it because there's a bishop unguarded behind it. I suppose the knight could go here and defend the bishop. But what I'm going to recommend after queen to b6 is to play queen to d3. Now, that defends the bishop. It also defends the e4 pawn. And it connects the rooks. It gets the queen into the game. But you may wonder, what about that b2 pawn? Well, it's okay. If Black takes it, White can actually win a pawn back if he wants to. And here's how. He can play rook a b1, queen to a3. It's forced. Then we remove the knight on c6. He recaptures. And we play knight to d5 with a discovered attack on the queen. And Black will take our queen, and we'll get in this in-between move, a Zwischenzug as it's called. Knight takes e7 check. Then when the king moves, we'll take the queen back, and we'll take it with the pawn to fix our pawn structure. We have a really nice structure here now. And then you wonder, is this okay to play like this? The material is equal. That knight looks like it might get trapped in there, but it can't. Can that square be covered? Can that get trapped in? The engine says it can't. It's plus 0.5. It doesn't look like it. Maybe that move could be considered. But then we can attack that square again. Maybe that happens to guard it again. Oh, you can't do that. We'll just take that with the knight. So yeah, it's hard, I guess. Can Black defend this? Can push it? Okay, and then it says, okay, we can push this pawn. Okay, and that threatens to anchor the knight there. So he probably would take it. We'd take back. And now we have squares. We're going to have that square for the knight. So I can't think of any way Black can trap that knight in there. All right, so that's another possible line here in the Levenfish. Okay, so going back to summarize here, when you see this dragon move g6, you can play f4, called the Levenfish variation or Levenfish attack. The idea is to push this pawn, and that's exactly what you want to do if you face bishop to g7. If you face knight to c6, which is the more accurate move, I believe, you can take the knight and then push to e5, or you can play something like bishop to e3 or bishop to e2 or something, and just develop sensibly. All right, thanks for watching the video.